2 days before I was supposed to walk down the aisle in a $90,000 wedding, my mother-in-law showed up unannounced with a moving truck. My fiancé was happily carrying her furniture into my bedroom. The note I left him the next morning changed absolutely everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who tried to take advantage of your success. My name is Rebecca. I am 33 years old and I work as a senior commercial actuary. If there is one thing my career has taught me, it is how to calculate risk. I spend my days analyzing complex data, predicting financial outcomes, and safeguarding corporate assets. I have built my entire life on logic, careful planning, and fierce independence. But no formula or spreadsheet could have ever prepared me for the complete lack of basic respect I walked into that Friday afternoon. I was returning to my Austin, Texas home after a grueling out-of-state risk assessment project. I was bone-tired. The deep physical exhaustion settled into my muscles. But underneath that fatigue, I buzzed with excitement. It was exactly 48 hours before my wedding. The luxury venue was booked, and $90,000 was meticulously spent to ensure the day was flawless. I paid for the entire wedding myself without asking for a single dime. That was how I operated. I worked incredibly hard in my 20s so I could be secure in my 30s. That independence was why I owned my home outright. I purchased the sprawling 4-bedroom property through my own limited liability company a year before I ever met Jason. It was my sanctuary. I personally chose the dark hardwood floors, the imported marble countertops, and custom lighting. It was a physical representation of my success where I felt completely safe. Jason moved in a year after we started dating. He was 34, working in wealth management, and seemed to understand my boundaries. He praised my work ethic, or at least that is what I thought. I pulled my car into the driveway, longing for nothing more than a hot shower and a glass of wine. But as the garage door rolled up, my heart skipped a beat. A massive moving truck parked aggressively across the curb, its back ramp lowered onto my pristine front lawn. 2 men in matching gray uniforms hauled a heavy floral-patterned sofa up my walkway. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel tight, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had Jason ordered new furniture without telling me? It seemed highly unlikely. We just finalized the interior design of the house last month. I grabbed my briefcase and stepped out of the car, the stifling Texas heat hitting me instantly. The front door was propped wide open, catching the warm afternoon breeze. I walked into the foyer and stopped dead in my tracks. My beautiful, meticulously organized hallway was completely impassable. Dozens of heavy cardboard boxes stacked 4 high against the freshly painted walls created a narrow, claustrophobic maze. Some boxes were labeled with thick black marker reading things like kitchen supplies and winter coats. This was not a simple furniture delivery or temporary storage. Someone was actively moving their life into my home. I navigated through the chaotic labyrinth of cardboard boxes, my pulse thrumming loudly in my ears. As I reached the base of the main staircase, I heard familiar laughter coming from the second floor. I looked up and saw my fiancé Jason. He was sweating through his gray t-shirt, his face flushed red from exertion, but grinning from ear to ear as he carried a massive heavy oak dresser up the carpeted stairs. He looked like a man happily building his future, completely oblivious to the fact that he was actively destroying mine. But he was not alone. Standing at the top of the landing, directing the hired movers with a flick of her wrist, was his mother, Linda. She wore a casual velour tracksuit and held a delicate crystal wine glass. I recognized the glass immediately. I also recognized the dark ruby liquid swirling inside it. She had boldly opened a bottle of my vintage reserve wine, a rare bottle I brought back from France and was saving to open on our actual wedding night. She sipped it casually, gesturing grandly toward the hallway leading directly to my master suite. "Be careful with the corners on that dresser," Linda called out to Jason, her voice carrying a tone of absolute unearned authority in a house she did not own. "That piece is an expensive antique. I want it centered perfectly against the far wall by the bay window so I get the best morning light." I dropped my heavy leather briefcase onto the hardwood floor. The loud, resonant thud echoed through the foyer, instantly cutting through the noise of the moving crew. Jason froze halfway up the stairs, his grip tightening on the wooden dresser. Linda turned around slowly, peering over the railing with an expression that barely registered mild surprise. "Rebecca, honey." Linda chimed in, taking another leisurely sip of my expensive wine. "You are home so early. We thought your flight did not land until 6. I stared at her in stunned silence, then shifted my furious gaze to Jason, who was suddenly refusing to meet my eyes, looking anywhere but at me. "What exactly is going on here?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm whisper, the exact kind of calm I used during high-stakes corporate audits when I caught someone lying. "Why is my hallway full of moving boxes, and why is that heavy oak dresser going into my personal bedroom?" Linda sighed heavily, adopting a tone of exaggerated patience, as if she were explaining a simple concept to a slow child. "Well, Rebecca, with the wedding just 2 days away, Jason and I decided it was finally time to be practical about our living situation. I officially terminated the lease on my apartment yesterday. I am moving in to help you two get settled into married life and to help raise my future grandbabies." She smiled widely, but it was a cold, calculating expression. "It just makes perfect financial sense, sweetie. Why should I pay exorbitant rent when you have this enormous house with all this empty space?" I felt a sudden cold, heavy knot forming deep in my stomach right then. The sheer audacity of her statement was paralyzing. She had not bothered to ask me. She had not even hinted at this massive life-altering plan. She simply arrived uninvited and expected me to absorb her entire existence into my quiet life, covering all her food, her utilities, and her living expenses, while she played the role of the benevolent wise matriarch. "And that is not all." Linda continued, waving her free hand very dismissively toward the smaller guest rooms. "Jason is moving all my things into the master suite today. My poor, fragile joints simply cannot handle standing in that tiny guest bathroom shower anymore. I definitely need the ensuite soaking tub for my arthritis. You and Jason can take the larger guest room down the hall. It is perfectly suitable for a young married couple." I stood there, the cool air conditioning of my own home suddenly feeling like a freezing gust against my skin. I waited for Jason to say something. I waited for the man I was supposed to marry in less than 48 hours to drop the heavy oak dresser, turn to his mother, and tell her she had completely crossed the line. I waited for him to defend our sanctuary, our future, and my property. Instead, Jason shifted the weight of the dresser against his hip, let out a nervous chuckle, and looked down at me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Stop being so dramatic, Rebecca," he said, his voice dripping with that casual, patronizing tone he usually reserved for customer service workers. "You are making a massive deal out of absolutely nothing. We are supposed to be a team, and right now you are not being a team player." I blinked, the sheer audacity of his words knocking the breath right out of my lungs. A team player. He was standing on the staircase of a house I bought with my own money, moving his mother into my master suite without my permission and calling me dramatic. The sheer entitlement radiating from his posture was suffocating. "She took an early retirement just to come down here and help us." Jason continued, completely ignoring the fury radiating from my rigid posture. "She gave up her whole life in Chicago to be here for our future family. We owe her this, Rebecca. It is the least we can do to make her comfortable. You know she has bad joints. Why are you trying to make my mother feel unwelcome in her new home?" Her new home. The words echoed in my mind, ringing with a hollow, sickening clarity. I looked past Jason to where Linda was still leaning against the railing. She offered a slight, self-satisfied smirk, taking another slow, deliberate sip of my vintage wine, as if to toast her own victory. As I stared up at the two of them, a sudden, blinding wave of realization washed over me. This was not a spontaneous decision born out of a sudden desire for family bonding. This was a calculated invasion. This was the culmination of 100 little red flags I had willfully ignored because I wanted to believe in the illusion of our partnership. My analytical brain, the very thing that made me a top-tier commercial actuary, began rapidly connecting the data points I had been too blinded by love to properly assess. I had spent years analyzing corporate risk, yet I had completely missed the massive liability living in my own home. I thought about our anniversary dinner just 2 months ago at a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. The bill had been over $800. When the leather folder arrived at the table, Jason had suddenly patted his tailored jacket pockets, his face arranged in a mask of perfectly rehearsed surprise. He claimed he had left his wallet in his other suit coat, apologizing profusely while the waiter stood awkwardly beside our table. I paid the bill without a second thought, just like I had paid for our engagement trip to Cabo, and just like I had covered the deposit for his luxury car lease, because his credit was temporarily tied up in what he called complex investments. He had soaked up the praise from the restaurant staff, acting like the perfect provider, all while I quietly handed over my card beneath the tablecloth. Then there was his younger sister, Ashley. 3 weeks ago, she posted a photo on social media sitting on the hood of a brand new, fully loaded luxury sedan. When I asked Jason how a 22-year-old barista could afford a $60,000 vehicle, he gave me a vague, evasive answer. He claimed he had simply helped her negotiate the dealership rates and co-signed the paperwork to build her credit. I had accepted the excuse because I trusted him. I had trusted the man who was now standing on my staircase, actively moving his mother into my bedroom. I remembered his sister laughing at a family dinner, joking about how her brother finally found a woman who could fund his expensive tastes. I had brushed it off as sibling banter. Now it felt like a confession. The most glaring warning sign of all had been his relentless push over the last 6 weeks to merge our finances. Every single evening, Jason brought home glossy brochures from his wealth management firm, pushing me to consolidate my corporate accounts with his personal ones. He framed it as a deeply romantic gesture, a way to truly become one unified entity before we walked down the aisle. He wanted full, unrestricted access to the limited liability company that held the deed to this very house. I had held off citing my busy work schedule, promising we would sit down with a financial planner after the honeymoon. Now, looking at his mother swishing my imported wine in her glass, I realized his desperate push for financial integration was never about romance. It was about securing an asset. It was about taking ownership of everything I had built with my own 2 hands. My extended silence must have unnerved him, or perhaps he mistook my calculated observation for quiet submission. Jason set the dresser down on the landing with a heavy thud, wiping sweat from his forehead, and walked down the remaining stairs to stand directly in front of me. He reached out, attempting to place his hands on my shoulders in a gesture of fake comfort, but I took a sharp step back, my eyes locked onto his. "Look," Jason said, lowering his voice into a soothing, manipulative cadence that made my skin crawl. "I know this is a surprise. I should have warned you she was coming today, but with the wedding preparations and your business trip, there was just no good time to bring it up. Just pack your everyday things into a bag and move into the guest room for tonight so my mother can settle into the master suite. It is just a room, Rebecca." I stared at him, my silence forcing him to keep talking, to keep digging his own grave with every entitled word that spilled from his mouth. I watched the way his eyes darted around the foyer, taking in the expensive artwork and the custom fixtures I had paid for, treating them as if they were already his property. "She is family now," he added, offering a tight, impatient smile. "Do not make this a fight. We have the rehearsal dinner tomorrow and the wedding on Sunday. We are all incredibly stressed out. Just go grab your clothes, let the movers finish their job, and we can order some takeout. By tomorrow, you will see this is actually a huge blessing." He was betting everything on the assumption that I loved him more than I valued my own independence. I looked past him. Linda was already walking down the hallway, disappearing into my master bedroom. Jason crossed his arms. "Just go pack your overnight bag, Rebecca. Do not ruin this weekend by being selfish." His deeply entitled words hung heavily in the suffocating silence of the dark foyer, sealing his ultimate fate. I took one final look at his expectant, arrogant expression. I silently nodded, then turned and walked away forever. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood. Every single step felt heavier than the last, yet simultaneously completely weightless. I passed the framed photographs lining the walls of the hallway. Pictures of us smiling brightly on a ski trip in Aspen. Pictures of us standing on a sailboat during a summer vacation. They looked like dusty artifacts from a completely different lifetime now. The man smiling in those pictures was a carefully constructed fiction, a mask designed to hide the parasitic intentions lurking just beneath the surface. I reached the far end of the hall where the guest bedroom sat draped in heavy afternoon shadows. I stepped inside the quiet room, my hand finding the cold brass handle of the heavy oak door. I pulled it shut with a solid, resonant click that felt incredibly final. I reached up and turned the thick deadbolt. The sharp metallic snap echoed loudly in the small space, sealing me safely inside. It was just a physical barrier, but in that moment it represented something so much larger and more profound. It was the final boundary line I would ever draw with him. I knew my life would never be the same again, and I was entirely ready to face absolutely whatever consequences came next. I stood perfectly still in the quiet darkness, leaning my back against the solid wood of the door. I closed my eyes and simply listened to the reality of my situation unfolding outside. Down the hall, the heavy thudding footsteps of the moving crew resumed their rhythmic marching. Then I heard Jason's voice. It was not muffled by guilt, hesitation, or even an ounce of remorse. It was loud, carrying down the corridor with absolute staggering arrogance. "She just needs to cool off, Mom," Jason said, letting out a short, breathy chuckle that made my stomach churn. "You know exactly how it is. She is just super stressed about the wedding and the catering and all that unnecessary nonsense. Give her a few hours to process it by herself. By tomorrow morning, she will be downstairs making us pancakes and pouring coffee like nothing ever happened." I heard Linda reply, her voice laced with that same patronizing, dripping sweetness. "Well, I certainly hope so, Jason. I did not pack up my entire life and move all the way down here to be treated like an unwanted burden in my own son's house. She needs to learn some basic respect. Do not worry about her," Jason assured his mother, his voice brimming with unearned confidence. "I have got her completely under control. Let us go look at the master bathroom. I want to make sure those movers do not scratch the marble floors when they bring in your heavy vanity mirror." Their voices slowly faded as they walked into my bedroom, the bedroom I had meticulously designed with my hard-earned money, the bedroom I was supposed to share with a man who genuinely thought he could simply manipulate me into quiet submission. I opened my eyes. The guest room was dimly lit by the late afternoon sun filtering through the closed window blinds, casting long horizontal shadows across the carpet. I walked over to the edge of the queen-sized bed and sat down. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for that crushing, overwhelming wave of absolute heartbreak that you see in movies when a woman finally realizes her relationship is a total lie. I waited to feel the devastating urge to mourn the loss of my future husband. But my eyes remained completely dry. My chest did not heave with desperate sobs. My heart did not ache with romantic longing for the man standing outside that door. Instead, my heart beat with a slow, steady, absolute rhythm of pure logic. The thick, confusing fog of emotional attachment evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a sharp, crystalline clarity that felt almost electric. I was a senior commercial actuary. My entire professional existence revolved around identifying hidden threats, neutralizing catastrophic liabilities, and aggressively protecting vital corporate assets. For the past 2 years, I had treated my romantic relationship as a mutual partnership operating on the flawed assumption of shared trust and equal equity. But Jason was not a partner. He was a hostile takeover masquerading as a loving fiancé. He had identified my valuable resources, bypassed my emotional security protocols with fake affection, and was now actively attempting a brazen, unapologetic acquisition of my property. It was the most fundamental miscalculation of his entire life. He assumed my silence in the hallway was a sign of surrender. He assumed I locked myself in this guest room to cry into a pillow and eventually accept my new miserable reality as the financial sponsor for his entire entitled family. He had drastically underestimated the woman he was about to marry. I stood up from the bed, my posture straightening as my professional instincts took total control. I walked over to the small glass-topped writing desk sitting in the corner of the room. I reached into my heavy leather briefcase and pulled out my corporate-issued laptop. This was not a standard computer. It was a highly secure, heavily encrypted terminal equipped with advanced financial tracking software, deep data mining programs, and forensic analysis tools. I set the heavy machine down on the desk, the smooth metallic casing feeling cool and familiar beneath my fingertips. I pulled out my power cord and plugged it firmly into the wall outlet. I was not going to make a dramatic scene. I was not going to run downstairs, yell at the movers, or scream at Jason and Linda to leave my property. Screaming was an emotional response, and emotions were a massive liability in a crisis. I needed hard data. I needed undeniable leverage. I needed absolute, irrefutable proof of every single financial move he had made during our relationship. I needed to see exactly how deep this deception really went before I made my next move. I knew that numbers never lied, and I was about to dive into the darkest corners of his financial history to find the absolute truth. I lifted the lid of the laptop. The screen flared to life, immediately casting a harsh, bright white glow across my face in the darkened guest room. The corporate security logo flashed on the screen, followed by a series of complex biometric security prompts. I placed my finger on the scanner, entered my secure multiple-character passwords, and seamlessly bypassed the corporate firewall. The powerful system hummed quietly as it established a highly secure connection to my private network. I opened a blank digital workspace, cracked my knuckles, and placed my hands over the keyboard. Outside this locked, heavy oak door, Jason and Linda were happily unpacking heavy cardboard boxes and celebrating their newly acquired luxury lifestyle. They truly thought they had successfully secured a free mansion and a lifetime meal ticket without any consequences. They actually believed that they could push me out of my own master suite and force me to fund their entire existence forever. They thought the game was already over, and they had won. Inside this very quiet room, bathed in the cool blue light of the high-resolution monitor, I began typing with rapid, focused precision. The real game was just beginning, and I was going to ensure they lost absolutely everything. I was absolutely, completely certain. With the house quiet around me, I turned from defense to investigation. My fingers flew across the backlit keyboard with a practiced rhythm. As a senior commercial actuary, my job required me to assess risk profiles for multinational corporations. I had access to premium public record databases, specialized financial tracking software, and background check platforms that the average person did not even know existed. I opened my primary investigative tool and stared at the blinking cursor. I decided to start with Linda. If she was willing to boldly commandeer my master bedroom under the guise of an early retirement, I needed to know exactly what kind of financial position she was actually in. I then typed her full legal name and her Chicago address into the search bar, bypassed the basic summary, and went straight for the county court dockets. The results populated on my screen, and I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the dense blocks of legal text. There was no early retirement. There was no voluntary termination of her apartment lease. Linda had been formally and legally evicted. The court documents detailed a drawn-out, messy legal battle spanning the last 6 months. She had stopped paying her rent entirely half a year ago. The final eviction was executed by the county sheriff exactly 4 days ago. I sat back in the chair, letting the harsh reality wash over me. Linda was not a doting mother arriving to help build a family. She was completely broke, newly homeless, and desperate for a place to live. Jason knew this. He had to know. He had orchestrated this entire sudden relocation to save his mother from living on the street, and he had decided to use my house as her free retirement facility. A cold shiver ran down my spine. If Jason was willing to orchestrate a lie of this magnitude, to move his evicted mother into my home just 2 days before our wedding, what else was he hiding from me? I opened a new tab and pulled up my own comprehensive credit report. I had always kept my personal finances entirely separate from Jason, refusing his relentless requests to merge our accounts. I assumed my assets were completely insulated from his reach. My personal score was perfect, completely untouched. But then, my eyes drifted to the secondary tab on my dashboard, the section that monitored the commercial credit profile for my limited liability company. That was the corporate entity I used to purchase this house and hold my other investments. The page refreshed and my heart slammed violently against my ribs. There, glaring at me in bright red digital ink, was a massive active liability that I had never authorized. A corporate line of credit had been opened against my company exactly 3 weeks ago. The approved amount was $200,000. Every single penny of that $200,000 had been withdrawn. My hands started to shake. I checked my corporate ledgers quarterly, but because the wedding planning had consumed every waking moment of my last month, I had not run a full commercial audit since the spring. Jason had found my one blind spot and exploited it with surgical precision. I quickly pulled up the detailed origination documents for the loan. The lending institution was a mid-sized commercial bank based out of state. I downloaded the approved application file and opened the scanned documents. As I scrolled through the pages, the breath caught in my throat. My signature was on the bottom of the authorization forms, but it was not my actual physical signature. It was my secure digital electronic signature stamp, the exact credential I used to authorize official corporate documents for my firm. Jason had watched me work from home countless times. He knew the passcode to my home office safe where I kept my backup authentication drive. He had stolen my digital credentials. But he could not have authorized a commercial loan of this size without speaking to a bank officer. I scrolled down to the secondary documentation attached to the loan file. There it was, a notarized, highly detailed digital power of attorney. The fraudulent document specifically granted Jason full executive authority to act as a managing partner on behalf of my limited liability company. He had fabricated the document, forged my digital signature, and presented himself to the commercial bank as my authorized legal proxy. He had literally stolen my identity to mortgage my property. This was not a lazy boyfriend asking for help with his bills. This was a calculated, premeditated federal crime. He had leveraged the equity of my home to secure a massive payout right before our wedding. I needed to know exactly where the money went. I used my forensic tracing software to follow the routing numbers from the initial loan disbursement. The bank had wired the full $200,000 into an external checking account, registered solely in Jason's name. From there, the money had been rapidly divided and deployed like a coordinated military strike. I tracked the first outgoing wire transfer. $75,000 had been sent directly to a high-risk day trading brokerage platform. Jason had always claimed to be a savvy wealth manager, but the data showed the truth. He was a reckless gambler. I pulled up the public transaction history associated with his trading account identifier. He had been making massive, highly leveraged bets on volatile tech stocks for the past year. He had lost nearly everything he touched. The $75,000 from my stolen loan was immediately swallowed by massive margin calls to cover his previous hidden losses. I followed the second wire transfer. $50,000 had been routed to an automotive financing group. I pulled the specific transaction receipt. The funds were used to make a massive lump sum payoff on a brand new fully loaded luxury sedan. It was the exact same car his younger sister Ashley had been posing on in her social media pictures 3 weeks ago. Jason had not just helped her negotiate a good dealership rate. He had bought the car for her using the money he stole from my company. He was funding his family's lavish, entitled lifestyle using my stolen equity. The final $75,000 had been scattered across dozens of smaller transactions over the past 3 weeks. There were massive payments to credit card companies to clear out Linda's outstanding debts. There were thousands of dollars spent at luxury boutiques, high-end restaurants, and expensive golf clubs. Jason had taken the wealth I spent a decade building and handed it out to his family like a generous king distributing gold to his extremely loyal, undeserving subjects. I sat alone in the quiet guest room, surrounded by the shadows of the late afternoon. The quiet hum of my laptop was the only sound in the entire space. The trustworthy man I truly loved simply did not exist. Instead, he had used my trust as a weapon to strip mine my assets, and he planned to trap me in a marriage to ensure I would be legally bound to his debts forever. I looked at the digital trail of his felonies on my screen. He had left a perfect, undeniable path of digital evidence right back to his own firm's servers. I reached out, took a deep breath, and carefully saved every single fraudulent document to a highly encrypted flash drive. Once the archive was complete, the shock that had paralyzed me was gone. The initial shock that had paralyzed me in the foyer was completely gone. In its place, a pure icy rage settled into my bones. It was a cold, calculating fury that sharpened my senses and eliminated any lingering traces of hesitation. I did not feel heartbroken. I felt weaponized. I stood up from the small writing desk and walked quietly toward the closet. My movements were slow and deliberate. I needed to leave this house tonight, but I refused to run away like a scared victim. I was going to execute a strategic tactical withdrawal. I reached up to the top shelf of the closet and pulled down my sleek black hard-shell carry-on suitcase. I set it gently on the mattress, unzipping it with a soft, continuous motion. This was the same suitcase I used for high-stakes corporate negotiations across the country. It felt incredibly fitting to use it now. I started with my documents. I moved to the small lockbox hidden in the bottom drawer of the nightstand, entering the combination with steady fingers. I retrieved my passport, my birth certificate, my social security card, and the original physical deed to the house. I placed them all into a waterproof folder and tucked them securely into the reinforced lining of the suitcase. Next, I gathered my jewelry. I opened my travel case and bypassed the delicate pearl necklace Jason had given me for my birthday last year. I now knew he probably bought it with a stolen credit card. Instead, I carefully packed the heavy gold watch I bought for myself when I made senior actuary. I packed the diamond earrings I inherited from my grandmother. I took only the things of real, untainted value. Finally, I moved to my wardrobe. I did not pack any of the casual weekend clothes I usually wore around Jason. I reached for my sharpest, most expensive tailored business suits. I packed crisp white blouses, my black leather pumps, and a single flawless designer dress. I was not packing for a personal retreat. I was packing for a professional execution. I glanced at the digital clock glowing on the corner of the desk. It was exactly 2 in the morning. Outside the heavy oak door of the guest room, the house was completely silent. Jason and his mother were fast asleep in my master bedroom, their chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, absolutely certain that their fraudulent parasitic reality had been fully secured. They were resting up for the rehearsal dinner, completely unaware that their entire universe was about to violently collapse. I sat back down at the desk and opened my leather briefcase one last time. I pulled out a thick, cream-colored folder bound with a silk ribbon. It held the vendor contracts for the wedding. I flipped through the heavy pages, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon I had previously skimmed over in my eagerness to marry a man who did not actually exist. The bottom line of the final page stared back at me. $90,000. The amount was staggering, but what stood out to me now was the strict highlighted clause just below the total. All deposits and final payments are strictly non-refundable within 14 days of the scheduled event. I had paid the entire $90,000 in cash from my corporate accounts. If I simply walked away right now, the money would evaporate. The luxury hotel would keep the funds, and Jason would spin a pathetic, tragic story to our entire social circle about how his unstable, dramatic fiancé abandoned him at the altar and wasted a fortune. He would play the heartbroken victim, and his mother would comfort him in my stolen house. I stared at the non-refundable clause, a slow, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face. I was an actuary. I did not waste money. I repurposed it. I reached for my sleek mobile phone lying on the glass desk and dialed a very specific number I had saved in my favorites. It was the private direct emergency line for Marcus, my dedicated corporate event liaison at the five-star hotel. Given the massive amount of corporate business my firm brought to his venue year-round, I knew he would answer regardless of the hour. The private line rang twice before his crisp, highly alert voice came through the speaker in the quiet room. "Rebecca," he said, sounding perfectly awake. "It is 2 in the morning. Please tell me you are not having a bridezilla emergency about the floral arrangements." "I am not having a bridezilla emergency," I replied, my voice cool and incredibly steady. "But I do need to make a massive fundamental change to the booking for this weekend, and I need it done immediately. I will gladly pay whatever exorbitant rush fee the hotel requires to make this happen, without any questions asked." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard as Marcus likely pulled up my massive event file. "I am listening," he said, his tone instantly shifting from friendly banter to strict professional accommodation. "Tell me what you need, Rebecca." "I am completely canceling the wedding," I stated flatly into the receiver. "There will be no ceremony, no bridal party, and no romantic reception. However, I am keeping the grand ballroom, the full premium catering package, the top-tier open bar, and the entire audiovisual setup. I am converting my personal reservation into an elite, high-level corporate seminar. I need you to strip away all the white roses, the delicate lighting, and the romantic decor. I want the room set up for a major business keynote presentation. I need theater seating for 250 guests. I need the stage expanded, and I need the largest, highest-resolution projector screens your technical team can possibly construct installed by tomorrow night." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That is an enormous pivot for 48 hours, Rebecca. The logistical shift alone is going to cost a premium. I can have my night team start stripping the ballroom in an hour, but the rush fee for the heavy audiovisual installation and the complete catering menu pivot is going to be an additional $10,000. Charge the entire amount to my corporate card currently on file," I responded without a single ounce of hesitation. "Consider the extra $10,000 an investment in my future. I need the catering switched from a plated wedding dinner to an upscale continuous corporate networking brunch. I want carving stations, premium seafood towers, and an atmosphere that screams absolute undeniable wealth and power. This is going to be the most important presentation of my entire professional career, and it needs to be completely flawless." "Consider it done," Marcus assured me, his voice brimming with professional excitement. "Your ballroom will be fully transformed and ready for a corporate keynote by Saturday morning. Is there anything else you need me to adjust for the guest list?" "Yes," I said, a dark sense of satisfaction settling deep into my chest. "I will be sending over a completely revised digital guest list by dawn. My security team will be managing the doors. No one enters that ballroom unless they are on my new list." I thanked Marcus and ended the call. I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. I had just taken a $90,000 romantic celebration and weaponized it into a $100,000 corporate snare. Jason thought he could use my money to build a comfortable, lavish life for his mother while keeping me quietly trapped in a guest room. He thought I was just a quiet, obedient woman, blinded by love and wedding planning stress. I closed the thick cream-colored folder and slid it securely into my carry-on bag. I was going to use my own wedding day to deliver a masterclass in absolute destruction. I did not close the laptop immediately. Before I left the house, I needed to make certain that Jason could not use another stolen credential while I was on the road. I opened the administrative console for my limited liability company and moved through the security controls one by one. First, I revoked the electronic signature certificate he had copied from my backup authentication drive. The system generated a permanent cancellation record with the exact time device identifier and authorization code attached. Any document signed with that credential after 3:52 in the morning would be automatically rejected and flagged as fraudulent. Next, I changed every commercial password connected to the company, the property holding account, and my private investment portfolio. I replaced the old recovery questions with randomly generated access keys and removed every device I did not personally recognize. Jason's phone, his home laptop, and the tablet he sometimes used in my office disappeared from the approved list. I activated biometric verification for every large transfer and instructed the banking platform to require my physical presence before any new credit could be opened against the company. Each barrier I restored felt like another steel plate sliding into place between my future and the man sleeping down the hall. Then I opened a secure video channel and called Claire Benton, the senior corporate attorney who had represented my firm through two major acquisition disputes. Claire answered wearing a navy robe and reading glasses. Her expression sharpened the moment she saw my face. "Rebecca," she said, "this is either extremely serious or extremely expensive." "Both," I replied. I gave her the facts without embellishment. I explained Linda's unannounced move. Jason's demand that I surrender the master suite, the fraudulent power of attorney, the $200,000 loan, and the distribution of the stolen funds. I uploaded the scanned documents through our encrypted portal while I spoke. Claire did not interrupt. She enlarged the signature blocks, checked the timestamps, and read the authorization language twice. When I finished, she removed her glasses. "Do not confront him again," she said. "Do not warn him that you found the loan. Do not delete anything from his accounts, and do not access any system you are not authorized to enter. Preserve the evidence exactly as it exists. We need a clean chain of custody." I told her I had copied the records to an encrypted flash drive and saved mirrored versions to a secure corporate server. "Good. Create a written incident timeline while the details are fresh. Include when you arrived, what you saw, what each person said, and the precise moment you discovered each financial record. Send it to me before sunrise. I will treat it as privileged attorney-client communication." I opened a blank document and began typing while Claire remained on the screen. I recorded the moving truck, Linda's wine glass, the dresser being carried toward my bedroom, Jason's statement that I was not being a team player, and his order that I move into the guest room. My training had taught me that memory softened around the edges once time and emotion began interfering. I refused to let that happen. Claire reviewed the power of attorney again. "The forged authority creates a much larger problem for him than he understands," she said. "The bank transfer crossed state lines. The stolen credential belongs to a commercial entity. His employer's systems may also be involved. This is no longer a private dispute between an engaged couple." "I know," I replied. "That is why I am leaving with more than a suitcase." At Claire's direction, I downloaded the original metadata from the loan application, generated verification records for the files, and placed copies in separate encrypted archives. One went to her. A second went to my company's fraud division. A third remained on the flash drive in my jacket. If Jason destroyed the computer in my house, the evidence would still exist elsewhere. Claire contacted the commercial bank's emergency fraud department while I continued securing the accounts. A representative named Martin Reyes joined the call and lost every trace of sleepiness when he saw the forged authorization. He confirmed that the bank retained recorded calls with the person who claimed to be my managing partner. "Preserve those recordings," Claire instructed. "Lock the file under your internal fraud procedure and document every person who accesses it." Martin placed an immediate restriction on the account. He could not recover money already paid to third parties without a formal process, but he could prevent Jason from drawing another dollar or modifying the original application. He also issued a preservation notice for the remote notary information attached to the power of attorney. For the first time that night, the situation moved out of the realm of private betrayal and into a system built to handle documented misconduct. Jason had relied on secrecy, embarrassment, and my reluctance to cause a scene. He had assumed I would protect the appearance of our relationship even after he violated its foundation. But a commercial fraud investigation did not care about engagement photographs, wedding invitations, or his mother's excuses. It cared about signatures, timestamps, routing numbers, and intent. When Martin disconnected, Claire asked what I intended to do with the wedding. "There will not be a wedding," I said, "but there will still be an event." A faint understanding crossed her face. "Rebecca, revenge is not a legal strategy." "No," I answered. "Evidence is. The event will be controlled and attended by people with a legitimate professional reason to see the findings. Every document will be redacted where required. No accusation will appear without supporting records. I am not planning a public spectacle. I am planning a case study that contains the truth. Then let me review every slide, Claire said. If you put this in front of executives, we do it cleanly. No speculation. Dates, amounts, routing data, and authenticated records only. Agreed. She warned me not to return to the house alone. Jason had already crossed legal and financial boundaries, and he now had everything to lose. I promised to remain at the hotel, keep the interior cameras recording, and contact her immediately if he threatened me, damaged the property, or attempted another intrusion. Before ending the call, Claire studied me through the screen. Are you certain you can walk away from him without going back for an explanation? I looked toward the locked door. Beyond it, Jason and Linda were sleeping inside the room they had taken from me. Neither had checked whether I was safe. Neither had apologized. They believed my surrender was merely delayed. I already have the explanation, I said. It is sitting in the loan file. The call ended at 4:37. I completed the final security reset, printed a summary of the revoked credentials, and slipped it into my document folder. Outside the guest room, the house remained silent. No footsteps approached the door. No one called my name. I looked at the dark reflection of my face in the laptop screen. The woman staring back at me was exhausted, but she was no longer cornered. My remaining assets were locked. The evidence was preserved. The legal machinery had begun to move. All that remained was to leave without disturbing the people who still believed they owned the night. I gently lowered the screen of my laptop and watched the glowing monitor fade to pitch black. The guest room plunged back into heavy shadows, but my mind had never been brighter or more focused. I unplugged the power cord, wrapped it into a tight, methodical coil, and tucked the encrypted machine safely beside my tailored business suits in the sleek carry-on bag. I reached into my jacket pocket and traced the small, sharp metallic edges of the flash drive with my thumb. It was freezing against my skin, holding a massive, undeniable digital paper trail of federal felonies. I zipped the suitcase closed, the quiet sound feeling like the ceiling of a heavy iron vault. I checked my watch. The glowing digital numbers read exactly 3:45 in the morning. The house was submerged in that profound, heavy stillness that only exists in the deepest part of the night. I stood up and smoothed the wrinkles from my dark skirt. There was only one final task left to complete before I initiated my departure. I walked over to the desk and opened the top drawer, sliding my fingers over the smooth wood until I found a heavy cream-colored piece of personalized stationery. I uncapped my favorite fountain pen, the heavy brass barrel resting perfectly in the crook of my hand. I did not need to draft a long emotional letter. I only needed to leave a clear, undeniable statement of fact. I pressed the nib of the pen to the thick paper and wrote a single, concise sentence in my sharp, looping handwriting. Enjoy the master suite. I am keeping the life you tried to steal. I blew softly on the wet ink to dry it, then folded the heavy paper precisely in half. I picked up my suitcase, gripping the handle tightly, and quietly unlocked the guest room door. The hallway was completely dark. I stepped out into the corridor, my bare feet making absolutely no sound on the imported hardwood floors. I crept silently down the hall toward my own master bedroom. The heavy oak door was shut tight, sealing Jason and his mother inside my sanctuary. I retrieved a small piece of clear tape from my pocket, pressed the folded note firmly against the center of the dark wood, and smoothed the edges down. I lingered for just a fraction of a second, listening to the faint, rhythmic sound of Jason snoring from the other side of the door. He was sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of a man who firmly believed he had outsmarted everyone. I turned my back on him and walked away without a single ounce of regret. I navigated the winding staircase in the dark, knowing every single step and every slight creak of the floorboards by heart. I bypassed the massive pile of cardboard boxes, choking my beautiful foyer, gliding through the mess with absolute precision. I reached the back door leading out to the garage, deactivated the perimeter alarm with a silent code on my phone, and slipped outside into the humid Texas night. The suffocating weight of Jason and his relentless demands was finally lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a fierce, empowering sense of absolute control. I was reclaiming my territory, my assets, and my entire future. My sleek black SUV was waiting for me in the driveway, bathed in the soft orange glow of the streetlights. I opened the rear hatch, lifted my single carry-on bag inside, and shut it with a firm, satisfying thud. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the quiet engine, and put the car into gear. I did not look back at the sprawling house as I pulled out of the driveway and merged onto the dark, empty street. I drove away from the parasitic illusion I had almost married, heading straight toward the gleaming skyline of downtown Austin. By 6 o'clock in this morning, I was sitting comfortably in the plush velvet armchair of a penthouse suite at a premier luxury hotel overlooking the Colorado River. The front desk staff had accommodated my early arrival without a single question. I felt a profound sense of tranquility wash over me as I settled into the quiet elegance of the spacious room. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and my mobile phone in the other. I opened my private home security application. When I purchased my house, I had discreetly installed a top-tier high-definition security system, complete with hidden interior cameras in the main hallways to monitor the property, while I traveled for long corporate audits. Jason knew about the exterior cameras, but he had never bothered to ask about the interior feeds, likely because he was too focused on figuring out how to drain my commercial bank accounts. I tapped the screen and pulled up the live feed for the upstairs hallway. I sat back, took a slow sip of my bitter coffee, and waited for the show to begin. At exactly 8:15, the heavy oak door of the master bedroom finally swung open. The high-definition camera captured Jason stepping out into the hallway. He was wearing his expensive silk pajama pants, stretching his arms over his head, and yawning loudly. He looked incredibly relaxed, rubbing his stomach, as he prepared to head downstairs and demand the lavish breakfast he felt he was inherently owed. But as he turned to close the door, his eyes caught the small, cream-colored piece of paper taped at eye level. I watched him through the screen, analyzing his body language with detached, clinical fascination. I saw his brow furrow in mild confusion. He reached out, peeled the tape off the wood, and unfolded the heavy stationery. He stood frozen in the hallway for exactly 10 seconds as he read my handwritten message. A normal man, a man who actually loved his fiancée and realized she had vanished 48 hours before their wedding, would have panicked. A normal man would have felt a sudden terrifying drop in his stomach, realizing his entire world was falling apart. But Jason was not a normal man. Jason was an entitled, arrogant predator who was entirely convinced of his own superior intelligence. Instead of panicking, a slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. He actually threw his head back and laughed. It was a silent, mocking chuckle, captured perfectly by the hallway camera. He shook his head, looking down at the note as if he were reading a mildly amusing joke written by a dramatic teenager. He pulled his smartphone from his pajama pocket and began typing a rapid message. Through my synchronized cloud account, which still held connections to his devices from when I helped him set up his phone, I could see the exact text he was sending to his mother. He typed with arrogant thumbs. "She is just throwing a massive tantrum about the boxes." Found a dramatic little note on the door. "She probably checked into a hotel to cool off and play the victim. Do not worry about it. We now have the entire house completely to ourselves for the whole weekend. Let us go out and celebrate. I will buy us brunch." The bait had been completely swallowed, and the trap was now perfectly set. He had absolutely no idea that I was already 10 very brilliant strategic steps ahead of his entirely pathetic and highly predictable little scheme. While I ignored his ridiculous text messages, my phone began vibrating with a rapid series of notifications from various social media platforms. I opened the applications and discovered that Jason had deployed his sister to launch a vicious, highly coordinated smear campaign against me. Ashley was aggressively tagging my close friends, my university alumni network, and several of my corporate colleagues in a series of highly dramatic public posts. She uploaded a heavily filtered photograph of Linda crying fake tears on my living room sofa. The lengthy caption claimed that I had suffered a severe psychotic break, completely abandoned Jason at the altar without any explanation, and was maliciously attempting to leave an innocent, ailing elderly woman homeless out of pure spite. She painted Jason as a devoted, heartbroken saint who was just trying to protect his vulnerable mother from my sudden, unexplained mental instability. I did not respond. I simply took a high-resolution screenshot of his demands and Ashley's defamatory posts, uploading all of it directly to the secure encrypted folder I was building for my legal team. I forwarded the entire collection of posts directly to my corporate defamation attorney. Every single word they typed was another heavy nail in their coffin, another piece of undeniable evidence demonstrating their parasitic nature. The social media posts were only the public layer of the attack. The security feed showed Jason moving through the house with a very different energy once Ashley put down her phone. He left his mother and sister in the living room and walked directly toward my home office. He tried the handle, discovered that I had locked it before my last business trip, and immediately returned with the small household toolkit from the garage. I watched him force a flat metal blade between the door and the frame. On the third attempt, the latch gave way. He stepped inside without hesitation and closed the damaged door behind him. The hidden camera in the hallway could not see the entire room, but the microphone captured drawers opening files, striking the floor, and the hard metallic scrape of the safe beneath my desk being pulled forward. Jason knew the old combination. He entered it once and received an error tone because I had changed the code remotely less than an hour earlier. He tried again, slower this time. Another rejection sounded. His breathing grew louder. He began testing birthdays, anniversaries, and familiar number sequences, each failure followed by a sharper curse. Linda appeared in the doorway and asked what he was doing. Finding the documents she took, he replied, "She cannot freeze us out if I have the company records and the house paperwork." His use of the word us was revealing. He was no longer pretending that the invasion was about helping his mother. In his mind, my property had already become a collective family asset, and I was the unreasonable outsider withholding access. Ashley joined them a moment later. She suggested calling the police and reporting that I had stolen Jason's financial documents. Jason rejected the idea immediately. He told her the police would ask too many questions about the company and the loan. Then he lowered his voice and said something even more useful. "We do this through public pressure," he said. "Her career depends on people believing she is controlled and rational. Once everyone thinks she had some kind of breakdown, she will pay to make the story disappear." I saved the audio clip separately. Unable to open the safe, Jason turned his attention to the filing cabinets. He removed folders, opened tax envelopes, and photographed pages with his phone. Most of what he found was harmless, expired insurance statements, old vendor contracts, and copies of documents already stored securely elsewhere. The original deed, my identity records, and the authentication drive were with me. Still, I recorded every act. He was demonstrating intent in the clearest possible way. He believed he had a right to search a corporate office because he had once shared my bedroom. After 20 minutes, he discovered a locked drawer containing blank company letterhead. He smiled. He removed several sheets, placed them inside his jacket, and told Linda that official stationery would make their next step look legitimate. I immediately sent a still image to Claire with a note identifying the exact paper stock and serial watermark used by my company. Any document Jason created with those pages could now be compared against the footage of him taking them. The scene shifted again when Jason entered the kitchen and called someone from his office. He paced beside the marble island, speaking in the polished professional tone he used with clients. He claimed I had become unreachable and asked whether a spouse or emergency contact could temporarily manage another person's corporate income during a medical crisis. The person on the other end apparently corrected him because his expression tightened. He began asking more specific questions about payroll exceptions, emergency disbursements, and medical authorization forms. That conversation told me where his mind was going. The failed safe had not stopped him. It had redirected him. He was searching for a new channel into my money, one that could be disguised as concern for my health. I forwarded the recording to Claire and added a short message. He is preparing a false incapacity claim. Her reply arrived almost immediately. Let him put it in writing. Do not interrupt him. I leaned back in the hotel chair and watched Jason return to the living room. He told Ashley to continue posting, instructed Linda to look visibly distressed in every photograph, and promised them that I would break before the weekend ended. He believed the performance was tightening around me. In reality, every camera voicemail, stolen sheet of letterhead, and carefully rehearsed lie was tightening around him. The trap was holding perfectly. I sat back against the plush velvet cushions of my hotel armchair, watching the bright morning sun climb higher over the shimmering Colorado River. The initial wave of Ashley's social media attacks had been designed to provoke an emotional response to drag me into a messy public shouting match where they could paint me as the hysterical villain. But my absolute silence was driving them insane. Narcissists rely on a constant stream of reaction to fuel their reality, and by denying them that oxygen, I was forcing them to escalate their tactics. The live cloud synchronization on my laptop showed Jason was ready to come after me directly. My phone vibrated violently against the glass surface of the coffee table. I slowly picked it up, watching his name flash across the bright screen. He sent a massive scrolling wall of text that read like a poorly drafted legal manifesto mixed with a ransom note. He started by aggressively demanding that I immediately wire $15,000 directly into his personal checking account before the banks closed at 5 o'clock. He broke down this ridiculous figure with absolute seriousness, claiming $5,000 was needed to cover immediate food and living expenses for his displaced mother and sister. The remaining $10,000, he so boldly stated, was a mandatory penalty for the severe emotional damages I had maliciously inflicted upon his innocent family by cowardly fleeing the house right before our wedding. He actually used the exact phrase, emotional damages, as if he were a judge presiding over a civil lawsuit, rather than a parasitic fraudster who had just been caught stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from my corporate holding company. He told me this financial compensation was the absolute bare minimum I owed them. The true masterpiece of his delusion came in the second message. Jason decided to play the role of a legal scholar. He smugly reminded me that because he had officially received mail and established his legal residency at my address over the past 12 months, he now possessed firmly cemented tenant rights under Texas state law. He gleefully pointed out that I could not simply lock him out or call the police to have him removed without going through a formal prolonged eviction process that would take months to execute. Furthermore, he insisted that as the primary property owner on the deed, I was legally obligated to continue paying the monthly mortgage, the exorbitant property taxes, and all high-end utility bills while he and his family occupied the premises. He essentially declared himself the triumphant, untouchable landlord of my own property. He ended the message by adopting a tone of fake patronizing sympathy, telling me to stay away at the hotel for as long as I needed to fix my broken mental health. He granted me permission to isolate myself in shame while I paid for his existence. I did not feel a single spike of anger. I only felt a cold, deep satisfaction. Every single word he typed was a legally binding admission of his intent to occupy my property and extort me for financial gain. I took precise, high-resolution screenshots of his demands, capturing the exact timestamps and metadata. I uploaded the images directly to the secure encrypted folder I was building for my corporate legal team. I was compiling a flawless, undeniable portfolio of his extortion attempts. I turned my attention back to the high-definition security feed streaming live on my secondary monitor. While Jason was busy typing out his financial demands, Linda and Ashley were busy securing their newly acquired territory. The exterior driveway camera showed a rented moving van pulling aggressively onto the pristine concrete. They had apparently decided that simply occupying the master suite was not enough. They were actively, permanently moving the entirety of their remaining cheap accumulated junk directly into my sanctuary. I watched through the foyer camera as Ashley and Linda dragged heavy scuffed plastic storage bins and battered cardboard boxes through my front door. They carelessly slammed the heavy plastic containers against the custom-painted baseboards, leaving dark, ugly streaks along the pristine white trim. They were hauling faded floral-patterned lampshades, cheap synthetic rugs, and bags of outdated clothing right over the threshold of my home. The juxtaposition of their battered, low-quality belongings, dragged across my imported Brazilian hardwood floors, was visually jarring. They were acting as though they had just won a multi-million-dollar housing lottery. By early afternoon, the chaotic moving process had seamlessly transitioned into an arrogant, full-blown celebration. The patio camera feed flickered to life as Jason marched out into my meticulously landscaped backyard. He was carrying a massive platter of thick premium cut steaks that I had personally ordered from a high-end local butcher earlier in the week for our rehearsal dinner preparations. He fired up my expensive stainless steel outdoor grill, tossing the meat onto the hot grates with the triumphant swagger of a conquering king. The impromptu party was officially underway. Linda and Ashley emerged from the house wearing bright, mismatched bathing suits, throwing their towels carelessly across my custom outdoor patio furniture. They lounged comfortably by the edge of my pristine infinity pool, soaking up the blistering Texas sun. The highly sensitive outdoor audio microphones picked up every single word of their conversation. Ashley was laughing loudly, holding up her smartphone to record a live video for her followers. She bragged to her digital audience about how she was going to spend the entire summer living rent-free at her wealthy brother's massive new estate. I zoomed in on the patio table using the camera application, and a sharp, cold smile touched my lips. Sitting casually next to the grilling steaks were 3 dark, heavy glass bottles from my locked custom wine cellar. They were carelessly opening and drinking bottles of rare vintage reserve wine that cost hundreds of dollars apiece, pouring the rich, expensive liquids into cheap, red plastic cups. Linda took a long gulp from her cup and complained loudly about the subtle gray color of the paint in my living room. She told Jason she was going to hire high-end interior decorators to repaint the entire first floor using my money. Jason laughed heartily, flipping a sizzling steak on the grill. He promised his mother she could have absolutely whatever she wanted. He boasted loudly over the crackling meat that he had me completely backed into a corner. He told his family that my professional reputation was simply too important to me, and that I would never risk a messy public scandal. He sincerely believed I would quietly pay all his mounting bills, absorb his massive debts, and eventually hand over the house deed just to keep him quiet. He interpreted my absolute silence as pure, terrified defeat. I sat in the quiet, immaculate luxury of my penthouse suite, watching them raise their plastic cups to toast to my supposed mental breakdown. They were drinking my rare wine, swimming in my pristine pool, and actively plotting how to drain the rest of my hard-earned bank accounts. They felt entirely invincible, failing to realize they were celebrating inside a burning building. Every action they took, every expensive bottle they carelessly opened, and every arrogant word they spoke was meticulously recorded and permanently saved to my secure cloud server. The evidence was mounting into a crushing, inescapable avalanche. I did not move directly from the patio feed to the banking dashboard. Before Jason made his next mistake, my legal team needed to understand the full architecture of the fraud already in front of us. I opened the secure conference room Claire had created and joined 3 people whose careers were built around evidence rather than assumptions. Claire appeared first. Beside her was Priya Shah, the director of internal fraud investigations at my firm, and Thomas Grant, an outside digital forensics specialist who had testified in several major financial crime cases. I shared my screen and walked them through the evidence in chronological order: the forged power of attorney, the stolen electronic signature, the commercial loan, the brokerage transfer, Ashley's vehicle payoff, and the payments clearing Linda's debts. Thomas asked me to stop on the original loan file. He enlarged the document properties and isolated a hidden creation record embedded in the PDF. The application had been assembled on a computer running software licensed to Jason's wealth management firm. The file had then been uploaded through a secure corporate virtual private network. "That matters," Thomas said. "It ties the fabrication to a controlled professional environment. His employer will have access logs and workstation records showing who used that machine. Priya compared the timestamp with Jason's office schedule. The application had been created during normal business hours on a Tuesday afternoon. At the same time, Jason had texted me claiming he was trapped in a client meeting. The lie was small compared with the theft, but it placed him physically and digitally at the source of the forged document. We moved to the notary certificate. Claire contacted the state registry and discovered that the identification number printed beneath the seal belonged to a notary who had retired 18 months earlier. The address listed for the notarization was a rented mailbox inside a shipping center outside Dallas. Thomas traced the document's verification link to a disposable web domain, created 6 weeks before the loan application and abandoned 3 days after the money was released. Jason had not merely copied my signature. He had built an entire false authentication trail to make the power of attorney survive a superficial review. This was planned well before the wedding week, Priya said. The moving truck was not the beginning. It was the moment he believed the financial part was already complete. The conclusion settled over the call with chilling clarity. Jason had prepared a system in which my money would cover his losses, reward his sister, erase his mother's debt, and secure a house for all 3 of them. The wedding would have converted his private fraud into a permanent domestic entanglement. Once we were married, he expected confusion over shared finances to slow any investigation and pressure me into absorbing the damage. Claire asked Thomas to generate a forensic report preserving the original metadata, the false notary credentials, and the employer network identifiers. Priya opened a formal internal fraud case and assigned a secured evidence number to every file. My personal crisis was being translated into the precise language institutions understood. Then Claire introduced 2 additional participants. Their cameras remained off, but their credentials appeared on the encrypted screen. They were federal financial crime investigators reviewing the material under a preliminary referral. Claire had contacted them after the bank confirmed the interstate transfer and the fraudulent identity documents. One investigator spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Ms. Rebecca, we are not asking you to provoke further conduct. Secure your assets and protect yourself physically. If he independently attempts additional access, preserve the records exactly as your counsel instructed. Do not alert him to our involvement." I confirmed that I was in a secure hotel, that the cameras were recording automatically, and that Jason did not know I had discovered the loan. The second investigator asked whether I expected Jason to attend the event at the hotel. "He believes it is still connected to our wedding," I said. "He also believes I will eventually return and surrender control to avoid embarrassment." Claire explained the conversion of the ballroom into a professional seminar. She emphasized that the presentation would use authenticated records, would be reviewed by counsel, and would include executives with legitimate exposure to the fraud. The investigators agreed to continue reviewing the file and instructed Claire on the formal handoff of the encrypted drive. When they disconnected, Priya turned to the property issue. "If he thinks the house gives him leverage, he will keep using it," she said. "What is the current ownership structure?" I displayed the records for the limited liability company that held the deed. The house had never been titled in my personal name. The company owned the property, and I owned the company. That distinction had protected the estate from personal liabilities, but Jason's forged authority created a new risk. As long as the company remained under my control, he could continue pretending that he had some connection to its management. Claire recommended a clean commercial transfer. One of our institutional real estate clients, Vanguard Property Group, had previously offered to purchase the holding company because the property sat in a rapidly appreciating district. Their proposal was still open. Selling the company would separate you from the occupied asset, Claire explained. Vanguard would acquire the property and the authority to address anyone occupying it without permission. I authorized her to reopen negotiations. Vanguard's acquisition director joined the call 40 minutes later. Because the house was owned through a single-purpose entity, the transaction could move faster than a standard residential sale. Vanguard agreed to purchase the company subject to confirmation that the fraudulent loan would be isolated and challenged by the bank. They also agreed to preserve the existing cameras for a limited transition period. The offer was slightly below the optimistic price I might have achieved after months on the market, but it removed an active liability, protected the remaining equity, and transferred the occupation problem to a company with its own legal and security infrastructure. From an actuarial perspective, certainty was worth more than theoretical upside. I signed the preliminary authorization through a newly issued biometric credential. Claire countersigned as counsel. The final transfer documents would be prepared over the next day and held in escrow until the bank completed its fraud notation. By the time the call ended, I was no longer simply exposing a stolen loan. I was removing every form of leverage Jason believed he possessed. His access credentials were revoked. His employer's server trail was preserved. Federal investigators had the evidence. The house was moving beyond his reach. All he had left was confidence, and confidence was dangerous only while the truth remained divided among separate people. I began assembling the professional guest list. The chief executive and compliance officers from Jason's firm received priority invitations. So did the commercial bank's fraud counsel, my own executive board, and several clients whose companies had recently strengthened their identity controls. The seminar would stand as a legitimate discussion of insider-enabled financial crime. Jason's conduct would not be presented as gossip, it would be demonstrated through records. Claire reviewed the first slides while Priya prepared redacted exhibits. We removed account numbers, private addresses, and unrelated personal information. What remained was devastating precisely because it was clean dates, signatures, transfer amounts, server logs, and the false authority Jason had created for himself. At last, I returned to the security cameras. The backyard celebration was losing momentum. Empty bottles crowded the patio table. Linda and Ashley were still discussing renovations, but Jason had stopped laughing. He stood near the kitchen doors checking his phone and calculating something behind his eyes. A moment later, he carried his laptop inside and sat at the marble island. Whatever he attempted next would be captured. The evidence was mounting into a crushing, inescapable avalanche. I shifted my attention away from the live video feed of their sun-drenched backyard celebration and pulled up my primary financial security dashboard on my secondary monitor. I needed to ensure that the rest of my corporate empire remained completely impenetrable while they partied on my patio. As I watched the digital bars graph the incoming data and outgoing activity across my various protected networks, a bright yellow warning banner suddenly flashed across the center of my screen. The customized security alert indicated that someone was actively attempting to access my primary commercial checking account through a recognized yet highly unauthorized Internet Protocol address. That specific account held the operational capital for my entire actuarial firm. It was a staggering sum of liquid cash that dwarfed the stolen line of credit by a massive margin. I swiftly brought up the geolocation data and isolated the specific device identifier. It was Jason. He had quietly retreated from the sweltering heat of the patio and was currently sitting at my custom marble kitchen island using his personal laptop. He had apparently decided that the $200,000 he had already stolen was simply not enough to sustain the lavish, carefree luxury lifestyle he and his mother were actively planning. He wanted direct, unfettered access to my main corporate vault. I sat forward in my plush hotel chair and watched the security log track his exact keystrokes in real time. He was desperately trying to bypass the highly encrypted login portal using a series of my old, outdated personal passwords that he had clearly memorized by watching me work over the past 2 years. He failed the very first attempt. He immediately tried a second variation, confidently adding my birth year to the end of the character sequence. He failed again. The advanced banking software, which I had personally configured with maximum corporate security protocols, immediately flagged the repeated unauthorized login attempts as a severe active security threat. On his third failed attempt, the system automatically initiated a total irreversible security freeze on the account. It locked the portal entirely, requiring a physical presence, government identification, and biometric verification at a local commercial bank branch to restore any level of access. I pulled up the kitchen camera feed to observe his reaction. Jason stared at his laptop screen, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. He slammed his closed fist down onto the marble countertop, rattling a nearby empty wine glass. He had hit a solid brick wall, and the realization that he could not easily drain my primary corporate reserves was visibly infuriating him. He pushed back from the island and paced back and forth across the kitchen floor. He ran his hands through his hair, clearly panicking as he rapidly calculated his next financial move. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash to maintain the wealthy facade he had just promised his mother and sister, and my automated security freeze had just severely disrupted his arrogant timeline. His aggressive pacing abruptly stopped. I watched as a new, highly calculated expression settled over his features. He walked back to his laptop, sat down heavily on the tall wooden barstool, and began typing with an aggressive, frantic energy. He was no longer trying to hack into my bank accounts. He was pivoting to a completely different strategy. A few minutes later, a specialized high-priority notification chimed softly through my encrypted headset. It was a direct alert from my corporate email server. Because of my senior executive status and my access to highly sensitive corporate funds, my legal team had configured my network to automatically mirror and monitor any external communications sent to my firm's human resources department that specifically referenced my personal name or my employee identification number. I opened the intercepted message on my screen. The sender was listed as Jason using his personal email address, the very same address he used for all of his professional wealth management correspondence. He had addressed the email directly to the Vice President of Human Resources at my actuarial firm, copying the senior payroll department on the message to ensure maximum visibility. The subject line read, "Urgent medical situation regarding Rebecca request for administrative assistance." I leaned closer to the high-resolution monitor, reading the contents of his email with a mixture of absolute disgust and clinical fascination. Jason had crafted a highly detailed, deeply manipulative narrative, perfectly designed to exploit the generous corporate wellness policies of my firm. He introduced himself as my devoted, heartbroken fiancé and my primary emergency medical contact. He wrote that the immense crushing pressure of the upcoming wedding, combined with the extreme physical and mental demands of my recent out-of-state risk assessment projects, had caused me to suffer a sudden and severe psychological breakdown. He claimed that for my own safety and overall well-being, I had been voluntarily admitted to a highly exclusive, isolated mental wellness facility located far outside of the city limits. He added that this specific medical center strictly prohibited any outside communication, incoming phone calls, or personal technology access during the initial intensive therapy phase. He expressed deep fabricated sorrow over my supposed tragic condition, profusely praising my firm for always supporting my long career, and then he seamlessly executed his true pivot. He brazenly requested that my company officially redirect my upcoming quarterly performance bonus, a substantial five-figure sum, scheduled to be dispersed the following week. He politely asked that the corporate funds be routed directly into a secondary checking account registered solely under his name. He justified this extraordinary, highly irregular request by claiming the money was desperately needed to cover the immediate, exorbitant out-of-pocket medical expenses required by my supposed luxury psychiatric facility. To solidify his bold lie, he attached a forged medical intake form to the email, complete with a fake physician signature and a fabricated facility letterhead, attempting to make his entirely fictional story appear entirely legitimate and legally binding. I read the email a second time, letting the sheer, staggering magnitude of his criminal overreach truly sink into my analytical brain. He was not just stealing from me anymore. He was actively attempting to defraud a major commercial actuarial firm by submitting forged medical documents to secure unearned corporate funds across state lines. He was openly using his own professional email address to execute a blatant act of federal wire fraud against my employer. It was a level of reckless, unfiltered greed that completely defied all rational logic. He was so incredibly certain of his own superior intellect that he honestly believed a multi-million-dollar corporate entity would blindly wire thousands of dollars to an unverified third party, simply because he claimed to be my caring emergency contact. I did not immediately delete the email. I did not block it from reaching the human resources server. In fact, I wanted them to receive it. I immediately forwarded the entire intercepted communication complete with the forged medical attachments and the embedded Internet Protocol routing data directly to my firm's internal legal counsel and the head of our corporate fraud division. I attached a brief, highly secure voice memo confirming that I was perfectly safe, entirely lucid, and working remotely from a secure, undisclosed location. I explicitly instructed my legal team to flag the incoming request as a hostile, fraudulent action and to permanently preserve all metadata for an impending federal investigation. I switched my gaze back to the kitchen camera feed. Jason leaned back in the bar stool, crossing his arms over his chest, with a deeply satisfied, arrogant smile. He believed he had successfully secured my quarterly bonus to fund his sister's shopping habits and his mother's impending interior decorating projects. He thought he had smoothly outmaneuvered my banking security freeze by attacking my corporate income directly. He stood up, grabbed another expensive bottle of my vintage wine from the kitchen rack, and strolled back out to the sunny patio to casually rejoin his celebrating family. I adjusted my posture, feeling the cool leather of the hotel chair against my back. I sat alone in the quiet, climate-controlled luxury of my penthouse suite, watching the vibrant Austin skyline sparkle brilliantly against the bright blue afternoon sky. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, dark flavor. He had given me every single piece of ammunition I needed. He had documented his own crimes, verified his own malicious intent, and tied his fraudulent actions directly to his professional identity. The trap was no longer just a defensive measure to protect my assets. It had evolved into a perfect snare that would permanently dismantle his life. I remained seated, watching the late afternoon sun stretch long dark shadows across my multiple computer monitors. My private corporate courier had delivered the heavy gold-embossed packages to my front porch exactly 20 minutes ago. Through the high-definition security camera positioned directly above the front door, I watched Ashley step outside to retrieve the thick black envelopes. She carried them back inside the house and ripped them open right in the middle of my imported foyer rug. The sensitive audio feed picked up her loud, dramatic gasp. She called out eagerly for her brother and her mother, waving the heavy cardstock wildly in the air. Jason marched into the hallway and snatched the invitation right out of her hands. I could see his dark eyes moving rapidly as he read the elegant script. It was a formal invitation to a private elite reconciliation brunch at the exact five-star hotel where our wedding was originally scheduled to take place. I had also attached a short, carefully crafted personal note printed on my corporate letterhead. The note expressed my deep, profound regret for fleeing the house so abruptly. I heavily implied that I was finally ready to publicly apologize, pay off whatever debts they had accumulated over the weekend, and formally hand over a legal co-ownership deed to the house, just to salvage my professional reputation and bring peace to our newly blended family. Jason read the note aloud to his mother and sister, his voice echoing clearly through the empty hallway. His reaction was exactly what I had calculated it would be. He did not suspect a trap for a single second. He threw his arms up in the air, shouting in pure, absolute victory. He genuinely believed he had successfully broken me. He believed my silence over the past week was simply the terrified retreat of a weak woman who was desperate to keep her social standing intact. Linda clapped her hands together, a greedy, malicious smile stretching across her face, while Ashley jumped up and down on my expensive hardwood floors. Jason proudly announced to his mother and sister that they needed to look like absolute royalty for this important brunch. He told them they were about to become official co-owners of a multi-million-dollar estate, and they needed to dress the part to show me exactly who was in charge of the relationship now. Within 10 minutes, the three of them piled into the luxury sedan Jason had fraudulently purchased for Ashley and sped off toward the most expensive outdoor shopping domain in Austin. They were actively going on a grand, deeply arrogant victory tour. I knew Jason had completely exhausted the $200,000 he stole from my company, But I also knew he still had a few high-limit personal credit cards that he had been desperately trying to keep afloat by making minimum payments. I opened a secondary tracking program on my laptop that actively monitored his public financial footprint. Over the next 4 hours, I sat in my quiet hotel room and watched the digital alerts roll across my screen. He was aggressively maxing out every single line of credit he possessed. He spent $3,000 at a high-end Italian boutique buying a tailored designer suit to wear to the brunch. He dropped another $4,000 at an exclusive department store, buying a silk dress for his mother and an expensive designer handbag for his sister. Ashley documented the entire reckless shopping spree on her public social media accounts. She posted live videos of herself twirling in front of brightly lit boutique mirrors, holding up shopping bags emblazoned with famous luxury logos. She bragged to her followers that her brother was about to secure a massive financial settlement, and they were dressing for the best day of their lives. They were eagerly funding their own financial funeral. They were spending money they did not actually have to celebrate a victory that simply did not exist. I watched Ashley post a final photograph of the three of them sitting at an expensive steakhouse toasting with tall crystal champagne glasses. The caption beneath the photo read, "Getting ready to secure the bag tomorrow." I completely closed the social media application feeling a profound sense of cold clinical calm. They had officially dressed themselves perfectly for the slaughter. Sunday morning quickly arrived with bright, clear blue skies and a warm, gentle breeze. It was the exact same day I was originally scheduled to put on a heavy white gown and blindly pledge my entire life to a parasitic fraud. Instead, I woke up at dawn feeling completely refreshed, fiercely alive, and completely unburdened. I ordered a light breakfast of fresh fruit and black coffee to my penthouse suite and took a long hot shower. I dried my hair and pulled it back into a tight, severe professional knot at the base of my neck. I bypassed the heavy garment bag holding my expensive wedding dress, which was currently sitting untouched and forgotten in the back of the hotel closet. I reached for the crisp, tailored designer business suit I had packed when I fled the house. It was a dark charcoal gray suit with sharp architectural lines that projected pure absolute authority. I applied my makeup with clinical precision, choosing a bold red lipstick that felt like war armor. I slipped on my black leather pumps and secured the encrypted flash drive containing Jason's forged loan documents and his fraudulent emails deep into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror standing in the corner of the room. I did not look like a heartbroken, abandoned bride. I looked like an executioner ready to deliver a fatal blow. I gathered my things and took the private elevator down to the lobby where my corporate event liaison Marcus was waiting to escort me to the grand ballroom. Marcus met me beside the stage with the final production schedule and a tablet displaying the secured guest list. Legal counsel had approved the exhibits, the technicians had tested every video connection, and the hotel security team had taken its assigned positions. I reviewed the opening slide one final time while the last guests settled into their seats. At exactly 10:15, a silent notification appeared on Marcus's screen. Jason, Linda, and Ashley had entered the lobby. I placed the encrypted flash drive inside the podium drawer and opened the hotel camera feed. Through the synchronized hotel security camera feed, I watched Jason, Linda, and Ashley strut confidently into the main lobby of the venue. They were wearing the highly expensive designer clothes they had bought on credit the day before. Jason adjusted his tailored suit jacket, checking his reflection in the polished brass elevator doors with an arrogant, self-satisfied smirk plastered across his face. Linda held her chin high, walking with the unearned entitlement of a wealthy matriarch, while Ashley practically skipped beside her, clutching her brand-new designer handbag tightly to her chest. They looked incredibly smug and completely certain they were about to walk into a quiet private room to receive a massive financial payout, a tearful apology, and the deed to my beautiful house. They stepped confidently into the elevator and pressed the glowing silver button for the grand ballroom level. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking straight into a meticulously orchestrated, completely devastating corporate slaughter today. The heavy brass elevator doors slid open with a soft, melodic chime, revealing the highly polished corridor that led directly to the grand ballroom. Jason stepped out first, taking a deep breath of the crisp, air-conditioned hotel oxygen, feeling absolutely invincible. He adjusted his silk tie and rolled his shoulders back, adopting the posture of a man who believed he was about to conquer a very small, very weak foreign nation. Linda and Ashley followed closely behind him, the sharp clicking of their new designer heels echoing against the hallway runner. They walked in a tight formation, perfectly aligned in their shared malicious greed and unearned supreme entitlement. His dark eyes were locked in a fixed stare on the massive, intricately carved, heavy mahogany double doors at the end. Two hotel security officers stood near the elevator, quietly confirming the names of every late arrival. He turned his head slightly to look back at his mother, giving her a highly confident, arrogant wink. He told Linda to let him do all the hard talking inside. He instructed his sister to keep a straight face and act as though they were doing me a massive favor by showing up to listen to my pathetic, tearful apologies. Jason placed his palms flat against the cool, polished wood of the heavy ballroom doors. He did not knock. He absolutely did not hesitate for a single second. He pushed the massive doors wide open with force, fully expecting to command the quiet, empty room the very exact second he crossed the wooden threshold. But the massive room was not empty at all. It was not a quiet, private sanctuary, prepared for a tearful, intimate family reconciliation brunch. As the heavy wooden doors swung fully inward, Jason was instantly forcefully hit by a massive wall of sound and light that physically knocked him back a physical step. Instead of a silent, lonely dining room, he was blinded by the rapid, brilliant flashing of professional event photography cameras. The harsh, bright white lights strobed aggressively against his face, capturing his deeply confused, bewildered expression in high resolution. The sudden blinding flashes were immediately followed by the loud, sophisticated, and overwhelming roar of 250 elite corporate professionals networking in a tightly confined event space. Jason stopped at the threshold so abruptly that Linda walked into his shoulder, and Ashley nearly lost her balance behind them. For one suspended second, none of the three moved. The invitation in Jason's hand promised a private reconciliation brunch. The room in front of him delivered something entirely different. 250 professionals filled the ballroom. Conversations moved between rows of conference seating registration tables and the raised platform at the far end. Hotel photographers documented arrivals near the entrance while technical staff monitored the projection system from a secured control station. No flowers framed an aisle. No romantic music floated through the room. No empty chair waited for an abandoned groom. Everything had been rebuilt around evidence, authority, and witnesses. A photographer's flash reflected off Jason's face. He lowered the invitation and stared at the gold lettering as though the paper itself had betrayed him. Behind him, Linda whispered that they must be on the wrong floor. Ashley checked the room number on her phone, then checked it again. They were not lost. The sound system chimed once. Conversations faded, chairs shifted, and the entire room turned toward the stage. Jason followed their gaze and saw me. I stood beside the acrylic podium with the presentation remote resting loosely in my hand. My charcoal suit red lipstick and professional posture belonged to a world he had never truly understood. At home, he had treated my work as an endless source of income. In that room, he was forced to see the structure behind it, the executives who trusted my judgment, the legal teams who acted on my analysis, and the institutions capable of tracing every financial choice he had tried to hide. His expression changed in measurable stages. Confusion gave way to suspicion. Suspicion became recognition. Then his eyes moved from me to the first row. The chief executive officer of his wealth management firm sat at the center of the VIP section. Richard Caldwell was speaking quietly with his general counsel and chief compliance officer. Two other members of the executive board reviewed the seminar materials placed on their seats. Jason knew every one of them. He had spent years controlling his posture and vocabulary whenever they walked through his department. Now they were waiting for a presentation built around the records he had created. Jason's fingers tightened around the invitation until the cardstock bent. Ashley leaned toward him and asked why his boss was there. He did not answer. Linda demanded that he take them somewhere private, but his attention had fixed on the opening slide displayed behind me. The title did not contain his name. It did not need to. Insider access, the anatomy of a $200,000 wire fraud. A visible tremor passed through his right hand. He finally understood that the room had not been assembled to hear my apology. It had been assembled to examine conduct. Every person present had a professional reason to understand what happened when a trusted individual obtained credentials, manufactured authority, and moved corporate money through systems that assumed good faith. Jason shifted backward, but the lead hotel security officer stepped closer to the doorway. The man did not touch him or block the exit. He simply made it clear that any disruption would be noticed immediately. Jason looked toward the elevators, then toward his employer's executives, calculating which direction offered the least damage. There was no safe direction. I allowed the silence to do what argument never could. I did not accuse him. I did not call his name. I gave him time to recognize every layer of the position he had created for himself. Linda whispered that I was trying to humiliate their family. Ashley understood more. Her eyes moved to the logo of the commercial bank printed on one attendee's folder, then to the compliance officers in the front row. She pulled her designer handbag closer, suddenly aware that the luxury car parked outside might soon appear as a line in the evidence. Jason tried to recover his professional mask. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, and guided his mother and sister toward the final row. The movement drew Richard Caldwell's attention. The chief executive turned. His eyes settled on Jason with mild surprise, then moved to Linda and Ashley, their gold-embossed invitations, and the tension in Jason's face. Caldwell did not wave or smile. He simply watched his employee take a seat near the doors. That absence of recognition disturbed Jason more than an open accusation. His employer was not looking at him as a valued wealth manager. He was looking at him as an unexplained variable in a room devoted to fraud. I stepped behind the podium. The technicians dimmed the house lights while leaving the stage in sharp white focus. On the confidence monitor at my feet waited the forged power of attorney, the stolen signature certificate, the distribution of funds, and the internal server route tied to Jason's office. He could not see the full sequence from the back, but he saw enough. His face lost its color. A bead of sweat formed near his temple and traced a slow line toward his collar. He reached for his phone, perhaps intending to message someone at work, but the secured ballroom network blocked unregistered devices from connecting. After 2 failed attempts, he lowered it again. I raised the microphone. "Good morning," I said. "Welcome to today's executive seminar. My name is Rebecca, and I will guide you through a documented case involving identity theft, insider access, and interstate wire fraud." Several attendees opened their notebooks. Richard Caldwell leaned forward. His chief compliance officer uncapped a pen. At the back of the room, Jason remained motionless. The invitation slipped from his hand and landed on the carpet beside his new shoes. I looked directly at him for 1 second, long enough for him to understand that nothing in the presentation depended on his cooperation. Then I pressed the button on the remote. The massive screens flanking the stage transitioned to a deep navy blue. Bold white letters appeared across the displays. Today, I continued pacing to the center of the stage. We are exploring a very specific, highly lucrative, and devastating corporate crime. We will be examining the exact anatomy of modern wire fraud and identity theft. The executives in the front rows nodded in approval, pulling out leather notebooks to take detailed notes. The chief executive officer of Jason's wealth management firm leaned forward in his chair, completely engaged. Jason, meanwhile, looked like he was going to vomit all over the imported carpet. I maintained unwavering eye contact with the audience, ignoring the terror radiating from the back of the room. I began my presentation by explaining how corporate risk was no longer just about external market threats or volatile global economies. I detailed how catastrophic financial liabilities often come from trusted internal sources, individuals who exploit misplaced affection and bypass authentication protocols to serve their insatiable greed. The most dangerous financial criminals do not wear ski masks, I told the captivated crowd, my voice echoing in the cavernous ballroom. They wear expensive, tailored suits. They smile warmly. They integrate seamlessly into our personal and professional lives to identify our financial blind spots and drain our resources. I glanced toward the back doors again. Linda and Ashley stood directly behind Jason, their faces contorted in massive confusion. They did not fully understand what was happening, but they knew this was not a lavish reconciliation brunch where they would be handed the deed to my luxury home. They looked entirely out of place in their brightly colored designer dresses, surrounded by a sea of dark corporate suits. I clicked the remote again. The 20-foot screens behind me transitioned to a white background featuring a folder icon labeled Case Study Alpha. To understand how these parasitic financial predators operate, we cannot just look at theoretical models, I announced, scanning the quiet room. We need to analyze an actively documented, recently executed instance of federal wire fraud. This specific case occurred within the last month. It involves the highly calculated, unauthorized acquisition of a $200,000 commercial line of credit. I heard a sharp gasp echo from the back of the room. Jason's hands were shaking so violently that he dropped his gold-embossed invitation onto the floor. The thick cardstock landed with a soft thud, completely forgotten. I did not break my professional rhythm or acknowledge his crumbling facade. The perpetrator, I continued smoothly projecting a redacted copy of the initial commercial loan application onto the massive screens, utilized a fabricated digital power of attorney to aggressively bypass standard corporate lending safeguards. I pressed the button on my remote once more. The screen zoomed in on the bottom section of the loan document. I displayed the fake digital signature stamp side by side with the fraudulent power of attorney paperwork. As you can see clearly on the left side of the screen, the perpetrator managed to steal a legitimate electronic signature credential, I explained. But the document on the right is where the true arrogance of the crime is completely revealed. This power of attorney was manufactured using a standard internet template. It was filled out with false information, illegally notarized under false pretenses, and submitted to a commercial bank across state lines. I watched the executives in the front row analyzing the documents projected above them. The chief executive officer of Jason's firm narrowed his eyes, recognizing the standard formatting and specific legal jargon commonly used within his own wealth management industry. The criminal in this particular case study actually believed he was untraceable. I told the silent audience, lowering my voice to command attention. He arrogantly assumed that by using a stolen digital proxy, he had successfully insulated himself from all legal consequences. He thought he had outsmarted the system. He was entirely catastrophically incorrect. I advanced to the next slide. A brightly colored flowchart appeared on the screens detailing the exact movement of the stolen $200,000. Advanced forensic financial tracking allows us to follow the exact deployment of the stolen capital. I explained, walking the audience through the specific money transfers mapped out on the board. $75,000 was immediately routed to cover outstanding margin calls on a high-risk day trading platform. Another $50,000 was used a few days later to make a lump sum payoff on a brand new luxury vehicle. I saw Ashley physically flinch at the back of the room. She clutched her new designer handbag tightly against her chest as the exact purchase price of her brand new luxury sedan flashed in bright red numbers across the giant screens. The color completely drained from her face as she finally began to realize that she was actively driving a vehicle purchased with stolen federal funds. But the most damning piece of evidence is not the money itself, I said, bringing my pacing to a halt directly in the center of the stage. The financial trail simply proves the theft occurred. To find the criminal, we have to look at the digital fingerprints left behind at the scene of the crime. I clicked the remote one final time. The massive screens shifted to display a highly detailed digital server log. Lines of computer code filled the displays. This is the exact, undeniably specific Internet Protocol routing data directly attached to the fraudulent commercial loan submission, I announced, projecting my voice clearly to the very back rows. The Internet Protocol addresses were partially redacted to comply with privacy standards, but the specific domain routing information was undeniably clear. I read the technical data aloud to the room, deliberately highlighting the specific server gateway that was used to commit the federal crime. The gateway specifically and undeniably belonged to the wealth management firm, sitting directly in the front row. The perpetrator did not execute this massive financial theft from a hidden off-grid location. I announced, my voice ringing with cold, hard, absolute finality. He logged into his employer's internal server network during standard business hours. He used restricted corporate resources, corporate internet connections, and company time to commit federal wire fraud. The chief executive officer, sitting in the very front row, abruptly stopped taking notes. He froze, his expensive silver pen hovering motionless over his custom leather notebook. He stared, unblinking, at the domain routing information displayed on the massive 20-foot screen. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly white, as he instantly recognized his own company's highly specific internal server architecture. He realized in that exact horrifying moment that a junior member of his own trusted staff had completely abused his firm's secure network to commit a massive federal felony. The chief executive officer of the wealth management firm stood up from his front row seat. His name was Richard Caldwell, known for absolute ethical standards. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom shattered by the sound of his metal chair scraping aggressively against the polished hotel floor. Every person in the room turned toward him. Mr. Caldwell turned his body around, his eyes locking onto Jason, who was paralyzed by the heavy doors at the back. The blood rushed to Mr. Caldwell's face, turning his complexion a furious crimson. He pointed an accusatory finger directly at his terrified employee. Jason, Mr. Caldwell's voice boomed, bypassing the need for a microphone. His deep, authoritative tone carried effortlessly over the seated audience, vibrating with a level of pure corporate rage that made even the most seasoned executives physically flinch. Did you use my secure internal servers to process a fraudulent commercial loan application? Jason opened his mouth, but only a pathetic wheeze escaped his throat. He took a trembling step backward, his brand new designer shoes feeling like lead weights. He looked like a trapped animal surrounded by apex predators. I asked you a direct question, Mr. Caldwell shouted, marching straight down the center aisle. Did you utilize my firm's proprietary banking network to steal $200,000 from a senior commercial actuary? I swear, Jason stammered, his voice cracking violently into a high, desperate pitch. It is a massive misunderstanding. She is my fiancé. We share our assets. I was just consolidating our portfolio for the wedding. She is twisting the data over a domestic dispute. Do not insult my intelligence by lying to my face, Mr. Caldwell roared, closing the distance. The digital routing numbers are displayed on a 20-foot screen for industry professionals to analyze. You forged a digital power of attorney, stole federal funds, and routed them through my pristine network. You are officially terminated, effective immediately. You are stripped of your corporate access, security clearance, and broker licenses. I will ensure you are permanently barred from working in the financial sector again. My legal team will hand over every single byte of your internal server data to the authorities by noon today. Jason physically staggered, leaning heavily against the brass door handle to keep from collapsing. His entire professional identity had just been completely vaporized in less than 60 seconds. He had spent years cultivating the image of a brilliant wealth manager, and now he was publicly branded as a reckless, incompetent thief in front of his boss and hundreds of peers. Cha-ta. Linda suddenly snapped out of her bewildered stupor. Seeing her golden son being aggressively dismantled by a powerful executive triggered her blind maternal entitlement. She pushed past Ashley and stepped in front of Jason, using her body as a physical shield. She pointed her finger wildly toward the brightly lit stage. You are a liar! Linda screamed, her voice echoing through the ballroom. She glared at me with unhinged hatred. You are a sick monster. My son is an honest man trying to build a life for you. You manipulated those screens to ruin him because you are a bitter woman. You abandoned him and now you are framing him. Somebody arrest her. I did not flinch. I did not argue with a delusional woman wearing a silk dress purchased with my stolen funds. I simply adjusted my posture, resting my hands lightly on the edges of the acrylic podium. Actually, Linda, I said, my voice projecting smoothly through the state-of-the-art sound system, cutting through her hysterical screaming. That is a brilliant suggestion. I nodded toward the side of the grand stage. The heavy velvet curtains parted, and two broad-shouldered men wearing immaculate dark suits stepped out from the shadows. They did not look like hotel security. They moved with highly coordinated, purposeful, tactical precision, proceeding straight down the center aisle. These gentlemen are my invited VIP guests for today's keynote presentation, I announced calmly to the captivated room. They are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation specifically assigned to the Financial Crimes and Corporate Fraud Division. I handed them a heavily encrypted flash drive yesterday, containing every forged document, stolen digital signature, and piece of Internet Protocol routing data Jason generated. The two federal agents reached the back of the ballroom. One of them pulled a leather wallet from his interior jacket pocket and flipped it open, flashing a heavy gold badge directly in Jason's face. Jason, the lead agent, said, his voice dropping into an uncompromising register that commanded absolute compliance. You are being detained for questioning regarding multiple allegations of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and corporate financial exploitation. Please place your hands behind your back. No, Linda shrieked, batting frantically at the agent's arm. You cannot do this to him. He is a respected wealth manager. He has a wedding today. He has a house. You are ruining everything. The second agent stepped between Linda and her son, gently but firmly moving her aside. Ma'am, if you continue to interfere with a federal investigation, you will be detained for obstruction. Please step back immediately. Ashley burst into heavy theatrical tears, dropping her brand new designer handbag onto the floor. She pressed her hands against her face, realizing the catastrophic gravity of the situation. Her luxury car and expensive clothes were purchased with stolen money. She was standing in a federal crime scene. Jason did not try to run. He knew there was nowhere to go. He slowly turned around, placing his trembling hands behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic clicking of the steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the silent, captivated ballroom. The sound was incredibly final. It was the undeniable sound of a man losing his freedom, his reputation, and his entire future in one single devastating moment. The agents turned him around by his shoulders and began escorting him toward the heavy mahogany doors. The reality of his absolute ruin finally shattered his arrogant, entitled facade. His chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths. A dark, desperate madness flooded his eyes. He looked back over his shoulder, locking his wild gaze on me as I stood safely elevated on the brightly lit stage. Even in handcuffs, Jason searched for one remaining point of leverage. His career was gone, and the fraud was exposed, but he still believed control of the house could force me into one final negotiation. You cannot do this! Jason screamed, his voice cracking hysterically, as the federal agents dragged him backward through the doors. You think you won, Rebecca, but you did not. I still have the house. We established legal residency. My mother lives there right now. You cannot kick her out. I still own your house. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut, cutting off his frantic, delusional screaming. I stood perfectly still behind the acrylic podium, letting his final, desperate threats hang heavily in the crisp atmosphere of the massive corporate event space. The 250 executives in the audience stared at me, waiting in breathless silence for my response. I reached out and gently tapped the head of the microphone. The soft, rhythmic thumping sound amplified clearly, drawing every single ounce of attention back to me. A slow, incredibly cold smile spread across my face. I looked directly at Linda and Ashley, completely horrified and utterly destroyed. About that house, I said. I unclipped the wireless microphone from the lapel of my charcoal gray suit and set it down softly on the acrylic podium. I did not need the state-of-the-art sound system to deliver my final message. The grand ballroom was incredibly quiet, that you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vents overhead. I stepped out from behind the podium and walked slowly toward the small set of carpeted stairs leading down to the main floor. My black pumps made a sharp sound against the wooden steps. I walked directly down the center aisle, moving with the calm, unhurried grace of a woman who held absolute power. The crowd of elite corporate professionals parted slightly, creating a clear, unobstructed path for me. I stopped exactly 2 feet away from where Linda and Ashley were standing. Linda was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. She clutched the fabric of her expensive silk dress, her eyes wide with raw, unfiltered terror. Ashley stood frozen beside her, the brand new designer handbag hanging limply from her wrist. I reached into the interior pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. The brass clasp was securely fastened. I held the envelope toward Linda. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely grasp the thick paper. She stared at the envelope as if it were a live explosive device. "Open it," I instructed, perfectly calm today. "You and your son were entirely convinced that you had successfully secured a free luxury mansion for the rest of your lives. You believed that changing your mailing address and physically moving your boxes into my foyer somehow granted you an untouchable legal claim to my sanctuary. You assumed the property was simply registered under my personal name like a standard residential homeowner. That was a massive, catastrophic miscalculation on his part, and by extension on yours." Linda fumbled blindly with the brass clasp, her manicured fingernails scraping uselessly against the thick paper. Ashley finally reached over and ripped the envelope open for her, pulling out a small stack of crisp, legally notarized documents. The top page featured a highly detailed corporate deed transfer. I watched their eyes scan the complex legal jargon, struggling to comprehend the dense financial terminology. As a senior commercial actuary, I deal strictly in risk mitigation. I explained, my tone conversational, yet brutally sharp. I do not leave my personal assets exposed to outside liabilities, and Jason was the absolute definition of a massive walking liability. I never owned that sprawling Texas house under the name Rebecca. I purchased that entire estate outright 3 years ago, using a highly insulated, anonymous commercial holding company. It is a limited liability corporation designed specifically to protect high-value real estate from parasitic creditors and hostile domestic claims. Jason thought he could boldly extort me for thousands of dollars in emotional damages because he felt protected by standard Texas tenant laws. He bragged to you both on my patio while drinking my vintage wine. He had built that threat on a fundamental misunderstanding. Mailing a few letters to my address did not turn his family into lawful owners, and occupying rooms without my permission did not transform a forged corporate authority into a valid lease. The property belonged to a commercial entity that had never signed an agreement with Jason, Linda, or Ashley. Ashley looked up from the deed transfer, her face tightening. "But we live there," she said. "Jason told us we have rights." "Rights depend on lawful possession," I replied. Jason entered the company's affairs by using a stolen signature and a fabricated power of attorney. Every claim he made afterward was tied to that fraud. The company never appointed him as a manager, never authorized him to offer the property to anyone, and never accepted any of you as tenants. Linda gripped her daughter's arm. "Then you still own the company," she whispered. "You still have to let us back inside." "Not anymore." I turned the second page toward them. Exactly 48 hours earlier, while they were drinking beside my pool and celebrating my supposed collapse, I had accepted a commercial offer for the limited liability company holding the deed. The sale transferred control of the property, its security systems, and all decisions regarding unauthorized occupants to a new institutional owner. Whatever personal pressure Jason believed the house gave him had disappeared before he ever entered the ballroom. I sold the entire limited liability corporation that holds the deed to that house. The new legal owner of the property is Vanguard Property Group. I am sure Jason is familiar with them, even if you are not. They are a massive, notoriously aggressive commercial property management conglomerate based out of state. They specialize in rapidly acquiring and liquidating high-value assets. They do not care about your fabricated family drama, your fake emotional damages, or your son's ridiculous delusions of grandeur. Linda began to openly weep, the heavy makeup she had carefully applied that morning running in dark, ugly streaks down her pale cheeks. She clutched the legal documents to her chest, shaking her head in pure, absolute denial. "You cannot do this to us," she cried, her voice echoing shrilly in the quiet ballroom. Where are we supposed to go tonight? We moved all of our things into that house. We have nowhere else to live. That sounds like a significant personal logistical problem, Linda. I replied, my expression completely unyielding. It is certainly not a corporate liability that I am required to manage. Vanguard Property Group maintains strict zero-tolerance policies today. Because your son used a stolen identity to secure his residency, they do not recognize you as legitimate tenants residing in the house. You are legally classified as hostile trespassers, occupying a commercially owned asset without a valid lease agreement or the owner's consent. I took a slow, deliberate step back, creating a clear physical boundary between myself and the two destroyed women standing in front of me. The federal agents have already taken your primary provider into custody, I reminded them, gesturing toward the heavy mahogany doors where Jason had been dragged out just moments before. He is currently on his way to a federal holding facility to answer for massive wire fraud and corporate identity theft. He cannot protect you. He cannot pay for your expensive lifestyle, and he absolutely cannot save your housing situation. The luxury dream life you thought you had successfully stolen from me officially expired the exact minute you walked into this hotel. I suggest you read the second page of that document very carefully. I turned my back on them and began walking confidently back toward the center stage, leaving Linda and Ashley standing completely alone in the massive room. The 250 corporate executives watched in stunning silence as the absolute gravity of the situation finally crushed the last remaining fragments of their entitled parasitic delusions. I had successfully dismantled their entire universe without raising my voice a single time. They were all now completely and permanently ruined forever, without a single shred of any mercy. I turned my back on the grand ballroom and walked through the heavy double doors, leaving the stunned silence of the corporate executives behind me. I did not wait to watch Linda and Ashley process the final devastating blow. I did not need to. I made my way to the private executive lounge, located on the top floor of the hotel, a quiet sanctuary reserved exclusively for high-tier corporate guests. The room was empty, cool, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and fresh lilies. I sat down in a plush armchair positioned directly in front of a floor-to-ceiling window, offering a sweeping view of the vibrant Austin skyline. I placed my briefcase on the polished mahogany table, opened my laptop, and pulled up my secure security dashboard one last time. Vanguard Property Group had graciously allowed my exterior cameras to remain active for an additional 24 hours to ensure a smooth transition of the asset. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the silver carafe on the table, sat back and waited for the final agonizing act of their tragedy to unfold on my high-definition screen. It did not take long for the camera feeds to capture the chaotic aftermath. Through the lens of the wide-angle driveway camera, I watched a standard rideshare vehicle pull aggressively up to the curb of the property. The Texas afternoon sun was absolutely blistering, radiating waves of visible heat rising straight up from the dark asphalt. The rear doors of the sedan swung open wildly before the car had even come to a complete stop. Linda and Ashley scrambled out onto the hot concrete. They were still wearing the expensive, brightly colored designer dresses they had purchased using Jason's stolen funds just 24 hours ago. The luxurious fabric now looked entirely ridiculous and deeply out of place against the harsh, unforgiving reality of their immediate homelessness. Linda was moving with a frantic, uncoordinated energy, clutching her new designer handbag tightly against her chest as she stumbled up the long concrete walkway toward the grand front entrance. Ashley trailed slightly behind her mother, typing furiously on her smartphone, likely trying desperately to reach her brother, who was currently sitting in a federal holding cell, completely stripped of his phone, his tailored suit, and his arrogant pride. They marched up the front steps, entirely expecting to use their keys, walk inside, and somehow barricade themselves within the walls of my former sanctuary. But the property they had so confidently invaded just 2 days ago was fundamentally unrecognizable. Vanguard Property Group was notorious in the commercial real estate sector for their aggressive zero-tolerance asset protection protocols. When they acquired a property with hostile squatters, they did not waste time with polite letters or gentle warnings. They executed immediate militaristic security measures to lock down their corporate investments. I watched through the crisp video feed as Linda reached the front porch and physically froze in her tracks, her hand hovering uselessly in the humid air. The beautiful custom-painted front door had been completely reinforced. A heavy industrial-grade steel security grate was bolted directly into the exterior brickwork, covering the entire entryway in a grid of thick, immovable metal bars. The elegant brass lock I had personally chosen had been drilled out and replaced with a massive heavy-duty commercial padlock that required a specialized digital keycard to bypass. The tall custom glass windows flanking the front door where Jason had arrogantly planned to place his mother's heavy oak dresser to catch the morning light were similarly covered by thick steel security shutters. The house looked like an impenetrable fortress, coldly indifferent to the two panicked women standing on the porch. Nailed directly to the center of the solid steel grate printed on bright, aggressive neon orange paper was a massive corporate eviction notice. The legal document explicitly warned that any unauthorized attempt to access the commercially owned property would result in immediate federal trespassing charges. I watched as Linda reached out with trembling hands and grabbed the thick steel bars, shaking them with all her remaining strength. The heavy metal did not budge a single millimeter. She pounded her fists against the unyielding grate, screaming something unintelligible that the sensitive outdoor microphones picked up as a series of high-pitched, desperate wails. She turned to Ashley, pointing frantically at the neon orange document. Ashley dropped her phone onto the porch and sank to her knees, burying her face in her hands as the crushing, undeniable weight of their absolute ruin finally settled over her shoulders. They were locked out. They had no legal recourse. They had no money, no powerful man to save them, and no home to return to in Chicago. They were entirely, permanently stranded. Then Linda slowly turned her head and looked toward the far edge of the neatly manicured green lawn. There, sitting directly on the scorching concrete curb, baking under the relentless heat of the Texas sun, was the absolute entirety of their miserable, parasitic existence. Vanguard's highly professional commercial clearing team had meticulously emptied the interior of the house of every single unauthorized personal item. Dozens of heavy black industrial garbage bags were stacked and piled incredibly high on the sizzling pavement. Sticking out haphazardly from the tops of the ugly bags were the faded floral lampshades, the cheap synthetic rugs, and the battered cardboard boxes they had dragged across my hardwood floors. Scattered carelessly among the cheap debris were the pathetic remnants of their arrogant luxury shopping spree. The expensive silk garments and premium leather shoes they had gleefully charged to Jason's maxed-out credit cards were now rapidly wrinkling and melting in the blistering summer heat, treated with the exact same level of disrespect they had shown my home. They were reduced to nothing but meaningless garbage, sitting quietly on the curb, completely and permanently erased from the beautiful, wealthy life they had so viciously attempted to steal. I slowly lowered the lid of my laptop until it snapped shut against the keyboard. The glowing screen faded to a deep, impenetrable black, mirroring the finality of their destruction. I sat in the quiet luxury of the penthouse suite for a long time, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. I felt no pity for the two women standing helplessly on the Texas concrete. They had intended to strip me down to nothing, to leave me broken, humiliated, and financially ruined, while they nested in my sanctuary. Instead, they had been forcefully introduced to the ruthless mechanics of corporate asset protection. I stood up from the armchair, smoothed the lapels of my business suit, and poured the remaining sparkling water into the sink. I gathered my carry-on suitcase, picked up my heavy leather briefcase, and walked out of the hotel room without a backward glance. The massive toxic liability had now been permanently neutralized. 6 entire months passed since that explosive Sunday morning in the grand ballroom. The massive fallout from my orchestrated corporate snare had dismantled their parasitic family unit with a level of brutal efficiency that I found profoundly satisfying. Jason was currently sitting in a sterile county holding facility, actively awaiting his formal transfer to a federal penitentiary. The federal investigators from the Financial Crimes Division had meticulously followed the digital paper trail I had conveniently packaged for them on that encrypted flash drive. They did not just find the $200,000 he stole from my commercial line of credit. The highly invasive federal audit uncovered a chaotic web of long-standing financial misconduct, illicit day trading activities, and multiple instances of severe wire fraud spanning across several state lines. The investigators also recovered the false notary trail and the forged medical documents he later sent to my employer, expanding the case far beyond the original loan. His former wealth management firm filed their own massive civil lawsuit against him for heavily damaging their corporate reputation and abusing their secure internal servers. He was drowning in a bottomless ocean of crippling, insurmountable debt, completely abandoned by the very mother and sister he had destroyed his own life trying to impress. Linda and Ashley did not fare any better in the harsh, unforgiving aftermath of their public execution. Stripped of my stolen financial backing and legally barred from ever approaching my former property, they were forced into a bleak, miserable existence that perfectly matched their toxic personalities. Linda was living in a cramped, poorly ventilated studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had no retirement savings, no valuable assets, and no wealthy son to blindly fund her lazy entitlement. The rent for her depressing living space was grudgingly funded entirely by Ashley. The sister who once proudly bragged to her internet followers about spending the summer lounging by my custom infinity pool was now working double shifts at a local coffee shop just to keep the lights on. I knew this detail because Ashley could not resist broadcasting her miserable reality to the public. She posted long, bitter, filtered videos on her social media accounts every single day, loudly complaining about how exhausting it was to financially support her demanding mother. They were trapped in a suffocating cycle of shared resentment, constantly blaming each other for losing the luxurious lifestyle they had briefly tasted but never actually earned. They were forced to experience the backbreaking reality of actually working to survive, completely cut off from the generous host they had tried to drain. I let the memory of their miserable existence fade into the background as I inhaled the warm, salty breeze rolling off the Mediterranean Sea. I was sitting comfortably on a sun-drenched private stone balcony perched high along the breathtaking cliffs of the Amalfi Coast. The sky above me was a brilliant, endless expanse of clear azure blue, and the sparkling, vibrant ocean stretched out toward the horizon. This was the exact luxury honeymoon destination I had originally booked and paid for in solid cash all those months ago. But instead of sharing this incredible paradise with a manipulative, parasitic fraud, I was experiencing the sheer, unadulterated joy of traveling completely alone. I reached out and picked up a delicate crystal glass, resting on the wrought iron table beside my lounge chair. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark, rich liquid. It was a glass of my favorite vintage reserve wine, the exact same expensive vintage Linda had been carelessly drinking out of a cheap plastic cup on my patio. It tasted like pure, uncompromised freedom. My mobile phone chimed softly on the table next to my wine glass. I opened an email from the executive board of my commercial actuarial firm. The message was highly professional and incredibly lucrative. I had officially been promoted to senior executive partner. The board had been profoundly impressed by the ruthless analytical precision I demonstrated when neutralizing the massive external threat to my corporate accounts, recognizing that a woman who protected her own assets with such calculating efficiency would guard their multinational corporate interests with the exact same ferocity. I set the phone down, letting the warm Italian sun wash over my face. I closed my eyes and listened to the soothing, rhythmic sound of the ocean waves crashing against the ancient rocks far below. I had spent my entire adult life meticulously calculating risk forecasting devastating financial disasters and desperately trying to build a secure, impenetrable fortress around my heart. But sitting here on this beautiful balcony, a world away from the toxic, grasping hands of my past, I finally understood the greatest, most profound truth of my entire career. The highest yielding return on investment I ever made was not a corporate real estate transaction or a diverse stock portfolio. It was the beautiful, decisive day I completely stopped financing people who only saw me as an open wallet and finally started investing entirely fiercely and unapologetically in myself. Looking back, the clearest warning was not the moving truck or even the forged loan. It was the pattern that came before them. Jason treated every boundary as a temporary obstacle. A forgotten wallet became my responsibility. His sister's car became my expense. His mother's housing crisis became my obligation. Each request was presented as proof of love, and every hesitation was reframed as selfishness. By the time he moved Linda into my bedroom, he was not creating a new dynamic. He was revealing the final form of one I had allowed to grow. That experience changed the way I define partnership. Partnership is not measured by how completely two people surrender control of their lives. It is measured by whether each person respects the other's work property judgment and right to say no. A trustworthy partner does not need access to every account to feel secure. A loving family does not treat your success as a shared emergency fund. And someone who punishes you for protecting what you built is not asking for intimacy. They are asking for access. Financial independence did more than protect my bank balance. It gave me time to think somewhere safe to go and the ability to make decisions without begging the person harming me for permission. But independence alone was not enough. I also needed the discipline to believe the evidence in front of me. Love had encouraged me to explain away Jason's behavior. Facts forced me to stop negotiating with it. I also learned that boundaries are only meaningful when they are supported by action. Saying no while continuing to pay every bill is not a boundary. Recognizing manipulation while hiding it from the people who can help is not protection. The moment I documented the facts, contacted counsel, secured my accounts, and left the house. Jason lost the secrecy that made his scheme possible. The lesson I carried away was simple. Trust should be generous, but it should never require blindness. Boundaries should be clear, and the consequences for violating them should be real. You do not have to wait until every account is empty or every room in your house has been claimed before deciding that enough is enough. The moment someone repeatedly converts your kindness into entitlement, you are allowed to protect yourself. Walking away cost me a wedding, a relationship, and the future I thought I had planned. Staying would have cost far more. I lost an illusion and recovered my life. That was not selfishness. It was the most responsible decision I ever made. Have you ever had to draw a hard financial boundary in a relationship to protect yourself from being taken advantage of? I would love to hear how you handled your situation in the comments below. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your power and thriving on your own terms. Thank you so much for listening.